My name is Mark Sewell, Assistant Chief Financial Officer. This is an item for City Council on June the 4th, 2024, regarding fiscal year 2024-25 proposed annual budget additional information. Staff recommend that the City Council and Housing Authority Board conduct a public hearing on the fiscal year 2024-25 proposed budget on June the 4th, 2024 for the City of Oxnard and Oxnard Housing Authority, and provide staff direction regarding any adjustments to the proposed budget in preparation for final budget adoption on June 18th, 2024. At its May 14, 2024 meeting, the Finance and Governance Committee voted unanimously 3-0 to recommend that the City Council and Housing Authority Board conduct a public hearing on the fiscal year 2024-25 proposed budget on June the 4th, 2024. Some key terms that will be used throughout this presentation. Adopted budget. The adopted budget is the revenue and expenditures approved by Council at their budget adoption meeting in June for the following fiscal year that starts on July the 1st. Revised budget. The revised budget is the adopted budget plus any City Council approved amendments during the fiscal year and any administrative adjustments for the carryover of unspent budget from prior years. Resolutions included with this budget item do include the details of what types of expenditures are eligible for carryover and include unspent CIP project balances and multi-year project unspent balances. Finally, proposed budget. Well, the proposed budget is the revenue and expenditures recommended by the City Manager to City Council for budget adoption at their meeting in June for the following fiscal year starting July the 1st, and if approved, becomes the next year's adopted budget. This presentation is designed to provide additional financial information to the staff reports and other presentation provided with the 2024-25 proposed budget. This first slide provides an at-a-glance all-funds view for the fiscal 24-25 budget compared to the current year, fiscal year 2023-24 adopted budget. The lines in the table show the major groups of funds, the capital funds, and then the non-city housing with a grand total. So as I draw your eye to the very first line for general fund, you can see that the 2024-2025 proposed budget is $255.7 million, an increase of $30.7 million over the 2023-24 adopted budget. That increase is due to a number of factors, including general inflation, some new funding for various operational needs within the city, and primarily the largest part of that change is a $20 million investment in reducing the city's pension long-term debt. Measure O is the next line, and you can see that actually is a lower budget, and this is in part due to the weaning of operational costs from Measure O into the general fund. The enterprise funds have an increase in expenditures of 32% year over year. There's a lot of capital in some of the funds that's driving that increase. We'll see that later in the presentation. Internal service funds are growing 18%, primarily driven by increased investments in cybersecurity and internet security in our IT departments. Special districts has an increase in its expenditures. And lastly, the special revenue funds, which include grant funding, have a significant increase of $91 million. And this is primarily to do with one grant award from the state of California for Rice and Fifth capital project. So therefore, the total of the operating budgets proposed is $761.655 million, an increase of 34% over prior year. Then we look to the second portion of the table where you see the capital funds. Investment in capital is proposed to be $200,855,000, an increase of $154 million across all of the funds. And by far the largest portion of that increase you can see in the capital outlay fund. That is again the Rice Fifth project, where we are projecting in the special revenue funds to transfer the grant funding into the capital outlay fund for that project to commence. Wastewater is also seeing an increase in capital of 42 million over the prior year. So when you add all of that up, you get to an appropriation of $962.5 million. It's worth noting that the capital appropriations are in essence doubled due to the way that through accounting rules, we show the appropriation within the operating fund and in the capital outlay fund. A transfer in revenue is also included in the capital fund to net out to just one net expense across the city. When we then add the non-city housing authority, we get to a total appropriation request of just over $1 billion. This next slide gives a little more information in terms of the significant increase in grant funding that's been proposed. And you can see on the table, it's split into federal, state, CDBG, and other sources of revenue. By far the largest increase is the $98.05 million of state grants funding. And as mentioned on the previous slide, that is recognized in special revenue and transferred to the capital outlay fund. And that is primarily the largest increase and relates to the Rice Avenue and 5th Street Railroad Grade Separation Project. Now we can turn our attention to the general fund. The general fund is the largest city fund and provides services such as public safety, parks and recreation, libraries, community development, finance, city attorneys, all of the core governmental functions required to operate a city. This slide shows the general fund revenues, where we present the general sales taxes, property taxes, and other taxes. And you can see that we are projecting a modest growth of total taxes, proposing $205,022,000, an increase of 4.8% over prior year. Within that, we are seeing some strong growth in property taxes, and we continue to benefit from the Amazon Fulfillment Center in the sales and use tax. Other taxes, which are more fees based in terms of building permits, park use fees, fines and charges, they are proposed as a total of $30.7 million, and that's an 8.4% increase over the adopted budget in 2023-24. Overall, total revenues proposed at $235.7 million, an increase of $11.8 million over the prior year adopted budget, representing a 5.3% growth. This next slide shows the general fund expenditures. The underlying expenditures are proposed at $235.75 million, in line with revenues on the previous slide. This table, however, does show you how the proposed budget compares to the FY23-24 adopted budgets by department. So total expenditures of $255.75 million is included in the proposed budget, of which $20 million of that relates to a one-time pay down of long-term pension debt. So when you take that out as a comparison for like, you are seeing a growth of $10.75 million in line with the revenue on the prior slide. Non-departmental, you can see that is an increase of $59.3 million. That is where the pay down of the long-term pension debt is actually programmed, and explains much of that variance. You also see an increase in the police and fire departments and public works departments in comparison to FY23-24, recognizing the new investments in those particular areas. Most of the departments are showing a budget that is growing. The finance department, the human resources department, and the community development department have requested budgets which are slightly below what they requested in FY23-24. When you put the general fund revenues and expenditures together, you have the impact on the general fund balance. The general fund beginning reserve at 13% of operating budget is $27.8 million. And at the end of fiscal year 2022-2023, the general fund had a surplus of $22.988 million for a total spendable fund balance of $50.8 million. The adopted budget for fiscal 23-24 included revenue and expenditures resulting in a deficit of $1.019 million. Staff are projecting a favorable variance in fiscal year 2023-24 of $13 million. When you add that to the budgeted deficit, that equals $11.981 million improvement in fund balance. So when you add that $11.89 million to the opening surplus of $22.988 million, the projection for the end of fiscal year 23-24's surplus is at $34.969 million and a combined spendable fund balance of $62.8 million. Applying the fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget to that fund balance, you have the beginning reserve of $27.8 million. Staff are recommending that Council move to the ultimate target of $16.6 million for this reserve as part of this fiscal 24-25 proposed budget. That would bring the beginning reserve for fiscal year 24-25 to $37.3 million. That increase in reserve has to be funded from the brought forward surplus. And so you see now the surplus for next year would be $25.5 million for the spendable fund balance of $62.781 million. Applying the budgeted revenue and expenditures proposed for fiscal year 24-25 shows a use of fund balance of $20 million, and that again is the one-time contribution for long-term pension debt. And the impact that has, therefore, is an ending reserve fully funded of $37.267 million at 16.6%, which is the ultimate target of the current council policy, and an ending surplus of just over $5.5 million for an ending spendable fund balance of $42.781 million, representing 17.5% of operating expenses. The Measure O fund, which is a half-cent sales tax, is shown on this slide. Revenues are proposed at $19.74 million, a decline of $1.7 million or 7.9% from the prior year adopted budget. This is primarily due to the fact that the Measure O fund had loaned money to the general fund, and the last payment of that general fund loan is due in fiscal year 2023-2024 of $1.876 million. So no further payments are due from the general fund, and therefore that is the reason why the revenue is projected lower than fiscal year 23-24. Expenditures by category are then shown below, and we can see that the amount of expenditure for public safety, traffic and road improvements, recreation parks and open spaces, and other community projects is declining by $1.5 million. And this is in part due to the weaning of Measure O expenditures into the general fund. These programs are not being reduced, they are simply being transferred to the general fund. Finally, there's a transfer to capital of $14.2 million in support of the general fund projects and for capital that would otherwise have been bonded, including streets. Measure O fund balance information. In fiscal year 2023-2024, Measure O started with a spendable fund balance of $17.5 million, and in 23-24, budgeted a use of fund balance of $2.9 million. When you take that $2.9 million from the opening fund balance, you get to an ending spendable fund balance of $14.6 million. The fiscal year 2024-25 proposed budget is again a deficit budget of $3.129 million, thus reducing the estimated ending fund balance to $11.45 million. We now move on to the water fund. The water funds on these tables exclude the transfer in revenue and the transfer out expenditures for moving money between the water funds for the purposes of funding the CIP program. Starting with revenue, revenue is projected next year in fiscal year 24-25 at $71.4 million. That is an increase of 2.1% over the adopted budget for fiscal year 2023-2024. Within there, you can see the utility fees are actually projected to decline 1.1%, and this is after the water department has revised the amount of water they think will actually be demanded by the community. Miscellaneous income is projected to grow $1.5 million, reflecting higher interest rates at the federal level and the cash balances in the water funds. Expenditures are proposed next year, very much in line with where they were in fiscal year 2023-2024, with the main exception of transfers out, where the water department is increasing the amount of money allocated for capital projects. So how does this impact the water fund's fund balance? The beginning reserve target of 25% of operating budget is $16.776 million for fiscal year 23-24. The water funds actually had a surplus of $8.7 million for a total beginning spendable fund balance of $25.5 million. In 23-24, the adopted budget was a slight surplus of $64,000, and staff have updated this with the projecting that they will end the year with just over $3 million improvement in fund balance. This adds to the surplus to produce a ending surplus of $11.678 million projected for fiscal year 23-24, and an ending spendable fund balance of $28.454 million, representing 42.4% of operating expenses. When we apply the 24-25 proposed budget, the beginning balance of 25% reserve has to increase as the expenditures are increasing, and so that $578,000 is added to the opening reserve for a new budget reserve of $17.354 million. That is funded out of the brought forward surplus, but as you can see, the beginning spendable fund balance is the same as the ending spendable fund balance from the prior year. Applying the proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25 shows expenditures in excess of revenues by $10.6 million, which is funded out of the surplus. Therefore, the proposed budget has an estimated ending surplus of $471,000 for an ending spendable fund balance of $17.825 million, representing 27.7% of the operating budget. Moving now to the wastewater funds. Fiscal year 2024-25 proposed budget includes $95.6 million in revenue and $98.069 million in expenses for a net use of fund balance of $2.5 million. The two significant numbers here are the transfers in and the capital expenditure. This represents transfers of funding for capital projects, external funding in the use of debt proceeds, and you can see that that is then a significant change from prior year of $45 million in revenue and an increase of $57 million in capital expenditure. The wastewater fund balance began fiscal year 23-24 with the $10 million in reserve at 25% of operating budget and a surplus of $51.4 million for a net spendable fund balance of $61.5 million. The fiscal 23-24 adopted budget had a use of fund balance, a deficit of $5 million, and staff anticipate that actually there'll be a favorable variance to this particular adopted budget of $1.98 million for a net impact of fund balance of a use of fund balance of $3,013,000. When you apply this to the opening reserve and surplus, it adjusts the ending spendable fund balance to $58.5 million. Applying the fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget, which is an increase in expenditures, therefore the reserve target needs to go up by $578,000, funded from the prior year surplus, meaning the beginning reserve is $10.659 million and the beginning surplus is $47.83 million for a beginning spendable fund balance of $58,492,000. The proposed 24-25 budget again uses $2.483 million of fund balance as its expenditures are higher than revenues, thus resulting in a projected ending reserve of $10.7 million an ending surplus of $45.35 million for a total estimated ending spendable fund balance of $56,009,000, representing 145% of the operating budget. Moving forward to the environmental resources funds, this table shows the revenues and expenditures for fiscal year 24-25 compared to the adopted budget in fiscal year 23-24. As you can see, revenues are projected to grow just over 20%, and this is due to the recent council-approved rate increases being assumed for the proposed budget for 24-25. Utility fees are projected to grow by $12.3 million. On the expenditure side, you see that the salaries and wages budget is projected to grow. This is driven primarily by overtime of the current level of service. And all other costs are similar to prior years, resulting in a total expense of $63 million. This budget proposes a deficit budget of $3.881 million as expenses are greater than revenues. The Enterprise Resource Funds began fiscal year 23-24 with $14.4 million in their reserve at 25% of operating budget and a surplus of $6.7 million for a combined beginning spendable fund balance of $21.104 million. The adopted budget for fiscal 23-24 had a deficit, a use of fund balance of $8.9 million, and staff anticipate that there may be a $2 million favorable variance by the end of fiscal year 2023-24 for a net impact on fund balance of a use of $6.982 million. When you apply this to the opening surplus, it actually pushes them into a slight deficit with an estimated ending spendable fund balance of $14.122 million, representing 24.7% of the operating budget. Moving forward to fiscal year 24-25, the expenditure budget is growing and therefore the target needs to grow, and that $578,000 is that increase that has to be funded from the deficit, thus increasing the deficit but maintaining a spendable fund balance of $14.122 million. Fiscal 24-25 budget, as just seen on the previous slide, is a deficit budget of $3.881 million. When you add that to the opening deficit, that results in a proposed ending deficit of $4.7 million when applied to the ending reserve for an estimated ending spendable fund balance of $10.2 million. And that is 18% of the operating budget. The Gulf budgets are very similar to the fiscal year 2023-24 adopted budget, with a couple of changes. One is a slight increase in revenue for interest income due to the higher interest rates. And two is a transfer to capital, adding about $1.5 million, comparing that to fiscal year 23-24 adopted budget, resulting in a deficit budget of $656,000. So how does this impact the Gulf Fund's fund balance? Well, in 2023-2024, the Gulf Fund began the year with its reserve fully funded at $1.444 million and a surplus of $3.68 million for a total beginning spendable fund balance of $5.124 million. Fiscal 23-24 is a surplus budget of $635,000, and staff anticipate no variances to that. This will lead to an ending reserve of $1.444 million plus an ending surplus of $4.315 million for a total $5.759 million. As a percentage of its operating expenditures, this is 101.4%. Bringing in the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget shows that with the budget growing, there's an increase to the target of $578,000 for a new reserve of $2.022 million, and that's funded from the reserve, maintaining the $5.759 million. As shown on the previous slide, the fiscal 24-25 budget has a reduction in fund balance of $656,000 as expenditures are budgeted higher than revenues. This results in the surplus adjusting to $3.081 million with the new adjusted ending reserve of $2.022 million for an ending spendable fund balance of $5.103 million. That represents 71.6% of ongoing operating expenditures. Staff recommend that the City Council and Housing Authority Board conduct a public hearing on the fiscal year 2024-25 proposed budget on June 4, 2024 for the City of Oxnard and Oxnard Housing Authority and provide staff direction regarding any adjustments to the proposed budget in preparation for final budget adoption on June 18, 2024. Thank you for watching this presentation.